Living Environment fans, it's thrash metal. I mean, hockey jersey, thrash metal Thursday. What is it? Oh yeah, hockey jersey Thursday. Every day's a thrash metal day, and yeah, I'm wearing a jersey today. Of course, I'm not wearing it now because I filmed this yesterday, Wednesday. But now it's Thursday. You'll see my jersey, and I'll tell you a little something about it in class. And then, of course, this week we continue Disease Week. We're going to start a new project today called Spreading the Disease, which we do right before Thanksgiving. Give you something to talk about during your Thanksgiving break. Diseases. So let's do this Bellringer. All right. Hey now. Mr. Kovacs class. It's Mr. Kovacs class. You might learn a ton. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
It's interesting too.
It's Mr. Kovacs class.
And he's super cool.
It's Mr. Kovacs class. All right, we've been talking about disease, sickness. In particular, we talked about smallpox, we talked about the flu, and we talked about HIV. Things that cause disease are called pathogens. There are lots of different types of pathogens. They come in basically two varieties. Some are living because they're made out of cells, and some are not really living because they're not made out of cells. Like, for example, the diseases we've studied so far have been viral diseases, right? HIV is a virus. The flu is caused by a virus. Smallpox is caused by a virus, right? There are a couple other non-living things we might talk a little bit about. Prions, which cause like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and they're proteins, right, that are not made up fully of cells. But most other pathogens are living things. They're either parasitic infections from like animals, like worms, tapeworms, or protozoans like malaria, or fungus like ringworm or athlete's foot, or they're bacterial. In fact, most infections are going to be bacterial infections, right? Like like strep throat is a bacterial infection. Be careful because a lot of diseases have what we call a vector, right? Like mosquitoes are a vector of many diseases, like encephalitis and West Nile disease and malaria. But the mosquito doesn't cause disease. The vectors transmit the disease. So if you ever see the word vector, that means an animal that transmits the disease. It's not the disease itself. Now, one of the most important discoveries of all time was done by this guy, a guy named Alexander Fleming. He was working with bacteria and bacterial diseases. And the story goes that he had a sandwich, and the sandwich got moldy, and he noticed that there was no bacteria growing near the mold of the sandwich. So he did a little experiment. He put some of the mold into a petri dish, right? This round plastic dish, a petri dish. He put a little bit of the mold in a petri dish, and then he smeared the petri dish with bacteria, and he let it sit there. And what he noticed was this: in rings around the mold, no bacteria grew. Okay? It's like there was an area around the mold that was killing the bacteria, wasn't allowing it to grow. Okay? We've done this many, many times. Like, here's the original experiment. Penicillin was the mold, and that penicillin colony kept staph bacteria from growing, right? Penicillium is the mold, right? And there's an area around the mold where the bacteria won't grow. We call that substance that was made by the fungus, penicillin, we call that by the mold, was called penicillin, and it's a antibiotic. What penicillin did is it basically broke the cell walls of bacteria cells, and it was amazing. It was a miracle, right? Because now you could get sick with something, you could take penicillin and it would destroy the walls of the bacteria that were making you sick. Now, it wouldn't work on viruses, but on bacterial infections and other living things, penicillin was awesome. It was like a super drug, right? It was the first antibiotic, and now there are tons of antibiotics. And you've probably taken a few, but penicillin was the first. It was discovered by Alexander Fleming. Nowadays, antibiotics like penicillin either destroy cell walls, or they destroy the bacterial cell's ability to copy its nucleus, or to copy its DNA, or to make proteins. It does one of those three things. Okay? The only unfortunate side effect of the awesomeness of antibiotics is that everybody wanted to use them. And because everybody wanted to use them for everything. And we noticed something about antibiotics, right? There's a bunch of bacteria. If you give some antibiotics, it will kill most of them, but it will leave a few behind for some reason that had mutations that made them a little bit harder to kill. These bacteria multiply. So in the next generation, you get bacteria that are even harder to kill. All right, and so what has happened, and bacteria are notorious too for talking to each other and passing genes to each other, so they can pass on the resistance to other bacteria as well. And so what happened is things like penicillin, which would kill like 90% of the bacteria within a few decades, was now only killing 5% of the bacteria because it had become resistant. We call that the antibiotic resistance. Right? Here's an example of the original penicillin test. Okay, here's the same test with the same bacteria later. You notice that penicillin still worked in some cases, but against some bacteria, it wasn't working anymore. There wasn't that zone of death around the mold. Antibiotic resistance. Talk about diseases and pathogens and antibodies and antigens and antibiotics and vaccines and a little bit about antibiotic resistance. And anyway, in class today, I'm going to give you a disease. And you're going to become an expert on it. No, I'm not literally going to give you a disease. I'm going to give you the name of a disease. And you're going to become an expert on it. And I'll tell you in the Spreading the Disease project what you're going to need to do over the next couple of days in class.